Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. In 2010, playwright and director Richard Nelson premiered at the Public Theater the first part of what is now a series of 8 plays he calls the Rhinebeck Panorama, consisting of the Apple family plays, the Gabriels, and now the Michaels. All hypernaturalist, beautiful renditions of family life that, within each of its parts, is able to unlock the beauty, hilarity, confusion, pain, and depth of everyday life. Joining him on stage is acclaimed actor J.O. Sanders, who has been with him since that first Apple play. Please put your hands together for Richard Nelson and J.O. Sanders. Let's hear it. Right? Since the first play, right? Yeah. I just did this upstairs when I met you for the first time, so I will try to keep it brief. I love your work so much. As a person who feels as though they study naturalism and cares so much about naturalism in both film and theater and storytelling in general, your work to me is a revelation, and every time I see it, it unlocks new ideas about what the stage can be and what acting can be and what writing and performance can be. It is so hyper-specific to you and what you do. I'm curious how you found it, how you found so specifically what you were inclined to and what your voice was.
Well, I think specifically in these projects, the Rhinebeck Panorama, beginning with the Apple family plays. The first play was called That Hopey Changey Thing. It started with just wanting to put people on stage in a conversation. No argument, so therefore no obvious theatrical drama, but having people just, say, over a meal, talk about themselves, their country, their relationships, their family, their ambitions, and how all of those things are entwined. And the moment you begin to sort of separate them, you begin to try to make points about things. And so I was interested in putting people on stage who had no interest in making any points, but simply wanted to talk to each other and listen to each other. And so that evolved into a whole almost aesthetic that I've been working on for a very long time. I've been writing plays for a long time. And that aesthetic became wanting to put plays on, characters on stage who make absolutely no effort to show the audience anything, but rather to be. So to be, not to show, became sort of the aesthetic of all of this work. And it involved creating a sound design system, which is a very radical sound design system. It meant that, and you can ask Jay about this, really relearning the art of acting, because actors are taught to show, taught to show an audience what they're feeling and indicate in some way. And my ambition and my aesthetic has been the opposite. It's even when, say, like with costume design, asking the costume designer to make it so that you wouldn't know, oh, there's the lawyer who came on stage because he's dressed like so-and-so. Let the audience discover everything. Put the weight on the audience to lean forward and figure things out for themselves.
Now, that said, in order to do that as a writer, you have to remove a lot of what you've been taught as a playwright, I imagine, because you're taught conflict is key. You are taught to sort of speak with as much brevity as possible. So you have to remove all of that. But then at the end of the day, after you've done all these rehearsals, you've found your story, you've found your characters, in a way you have to bring that back, because you have to have emotional satisfaction for the audience, which drama, all the rules of drama are essentially based off of. So how do you remove all of that and then bring it back?
Well, that's a great question. It's in most of the plays, and in the Michaels, for example, almost nothing happens in terms of almost nothing is revealed, and almost everybody on stage knows everything by the time the play begins. So what you're watching is a kind of revealing, where things are revealed and the audience is working very hard in putting things together. So I think the emotional drama is in that discovery of by the audience, and I think one of the comments that many people make, and something you said earlier, that you're just surprised when suddenly the emotion is there, where it comes from, how that penny suddenly drops, and it can drop at different places in the play at different times, depending on the audience or the people, the people watching.
Right. Jay, so talk about what Richard just said about relearning the craft of acting in the process of doing these plays with him.
It's a matter of trust that who you are and what you are is interesting enough and engaging enough with an audience and naturally conflicted. In other words, I'm trying to find the words to answer you. I'm running through a series of things in myself, and that's interesting to me, and it becomes interesting to you because I discover something as I commit to it to you. But that's where any conversation is for any two, or in our case, 6 or 7 people. So that by one of the rules of what we do is to think as we speak or speak as we think, not to, there are a lot of people in what you would call a naturalism who spend a lot of time in silence. So you say, so what do you think? And it's that long, well, what do you think I think? And it's not, but it doesn't really have anything to do with anything. It has to do with, it's more of a gamesmanship of how people tag back and forth and hold a power over someone else. If I hold you in silence after you've asked me a question, and I wait and finally say, no, I've just acted, but what I've really done is I've just exerted an amount of power over you, rather than saying, no, I don't. I'm committed, and your response is, but don't you do that? Yes, I do. And it's about, therefore the drama comes out rather than through individual character and a choice of expressing something of who I am. The drama is between the two of us in terms of honest interaction, and something that anybody watching recognizes and go, that's how I live. Right. Oh my God, that's what and then you begin to see nobody had to put a gun into the scene to make it interesting. Nobody had to light the house on fire to say, we got to get out of here quick, We don't need a car crash, because a car crash has nothing to do with anything. A car crash is a cheat for a way to say, we're going to make something happen even though there's nothing. You may not care about these characters, but you'll care about them because you'll want them to be safe. Yeah. So this goes to a very deep emotional well of simply being and accepting that who we are in our stillness is enough, and that in direct reaction, honest reaction, and vulnerable reaction, we talk about this a lot, always staying vulnerable, there is a huge amount to be discovered. But what you discover are things that you wouldn't discover if everybody was playing a hand, which is the way acting is normally done. And we look for those conflicts. We're trained, as you say, we look for conflicts. We look for drama to create. We look for emotional.
Objective, what does my character
all that
want?
Stuff. We don't play that. We don't play that. And it took me Richard and I had such wonderful conversations, going back to the very first Apple play, where I had a long speech sitting at a table talking about Sarah Palin. And it was obvious that both we, the family, and the audience all were not fans of hers. But when people came in, they expected this to be a bunch of us bashing Sarah Palin, and now we'll all feel good that we all feel the same way. And instead, it was my character who had become disillusioned with politics and had been working in the DA's office in Albany, who just says, we're not talking. We're not listening to each other. We're not being who we are. We're too busy taking sides. And can't we as a family sit at this table? And I think this was the root of the whole acting and dramatic arc that's gone on for the next 8 plays. Can't we sit and share honestly our doubts? We hold the line of a particular way of thinking because we were raised that way. But in any family, you have a group of 5 people in a family. They all come at life differently. They all have a different reaction. They all believe some things and disbelieve other things. And rather than saying, right, we can talk about it, there was the preemptive assumption that I have to toe the party line in order to be a liberal Democrat today or a radical leftist or whatever, I have to say this because that's what we say, or I'm somehow letting down. Instead of saying, no, forget all that. What do I really think? What am I really wondering? And what am I really unsure about? What am I afraid of?
I think I think what Jay's also talking about is that, and it's what I try to write. It's really at the very heart of it, is that I don't think that people are. I don't try to write characters separate from the situation. I try to write, and we try to create relationships. Everything is in relationship. I can have a line that I talk to you, speak to you, but if I speak it to Jay, it'll have a different meaning. And so figuring out the meaning of a relationship
And who we speak to.
and in this conversation is the very, very heart of sort of understanding the group of within these plays. You rarely see a single person on stage in these plays. It's about relationships.
It's also trusting that, they used to talk about Olivier finding the right nose for a character, and his wife, Joan Plowright, joked that with Olivier, first you'd hear his voice, then you'd see the makeup, then you'd get the character walk on stage. That notion of an outside in, I'm going to create this character and then I'm going to do all this stuff, is completely anathema to where we come from. Instead, rather than looking for character, I start always from myself, and I find the differences. I find a difference out about, because of the relationships I have in the room, that comes to define who I am. And I don't worry about speaking with an accent or a lisp or walking or having a hunchback or anything like that, all of which we've done in the past in plays and stuff. Rather, it is exactly as Richard's saying, it is all in the relationships between me and the other people in the room. And what I find is that by the end of one of these plays, even if you have felt no particular deep emotional engagement with a moment, though I venture to say there often are various moments of that, even if it's not that, there's no denouement in the same way. You don't rise to a climax and boom, and now it's happened, and somebody wins the point, or someone's heroic, or someone tells the bad guy, you never come back here again because I don't, but it's all that, the dramatic stuff. Instead, we play on, and Richard writes this very, very convincingly, and we do our best to play it, we play on everything that it means to be human, simply by being human and being present. And by the end, the emotions that we see from the audience, oftentimes I've seen people weeping at curtain call who were not, they say, I wasn't like this before, during the show, but as soon as it was over, I realized all these parts of me had been touched, and I didn't want you to go. And that's a really fascinating thing to understand and believe, to trust.
What I love so much about the Michaels is this idea that there isn't this climactic moment, that you're not writing a climactic moment, but I do think there is in the play. But you have deconstructed any idea of what a climax would look like by making it so simple and so seemingly small, yet it is the biggest, most choreographed moment in the play. And there is something it is the moment of extreme vulnerability for one particular character who has had trouble with vulnerability for very specific reasons throughout the course of the play. And she is watching her life's work live on beyond her years, which are coming to a close. And it's heartbreaking. And it only works because so much of their lives have been talked about in seemingly random ways around this table. So you are building to that sort of structural climax in a way.
Well, it's again the kind of revealing that I was talking about, because that's a moment in which the daughter of this choreographer dances one of her mother's dances for her, and the mother has been resisting watching for a while. So that right there is a relationship that's really deep. But then you also have each character in the play right now who's watching, and each one has an investment. You have one woman who's just arrived that day, and she had danced the dance 30 years ago. You had another woman who was part of the same company who had taught the daughter the dance. You have the father also watching. You have the new partner of the mother watching, who knows nothing about dance, and learning about her partner and her partner's life. So there is what's going on in that scene is just a series of revelations of understandings and connections between everyone, all coming together in a moment of the creation of art, and done in a kitchen. While cooking is still going on. There's so much going on there at that point, but it's all revelation.
I feel like no one could write these plays unless they had as many years in the theater as you have had. And I'm wondering how different your early plays that you wrote were from this, and if you were operating by these sort of standard rules of drama when you first started, and sort of how you slowly built towards this and found it.
Oh, it's a really interesting question. I have. It's been an evolution of trying to find this voice. And one of the things I found myself, when I look back at my earlier plays, there's always like a gargantuan event that's happening just off stage. Could be a riot in one play. It could be someone's being tortured in another. All sorts of, or could be a revolution. Could be a earthquake, which is in another play. But all of that is pushed on the side. And so that becomes, these major events, so these major theatrical events become muted and very much in the background. And I can see now that that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to take the world and put the emphasis on the minutiae, maybe is the wrong word for it.
The moments in between the drama.
Yeah, and the life that within the play, there's the value of everyday movement, everyday action, how cooking a meal, how setting a table, all of these things in our daily lives often have great significance and meaning, and how to find and invest ourselves as theatrical people, as artists, into finding and expressing the richness of everyday life. That's the ambition.
We don't have to, that's the thing too, we don't have to create larger-than-life heroes, that we're finding the heroism, the everyday heroism of continuing to live that exists in everyone in the audience, and that they recognize that in themselves, so that their involvement as they listen, they go, oh, that's me. Oh, that's like my son. Oh, yeah, I did that. Wow, I knew somebody who, I always wondered about that too. All of it is about people gradually feeling that they are sitting at that table with us, and people have said that over and over and over. I felt like I was sitting at the table. They start with, I felt I was looking in your window. I was overhearing and sort of a peeping Tom at your window. And then they say, and then I felt like I was actually sitting at that table. And you go, that's where the win is. Rather than going, yes, we're pulling for the hero to do the right thing, we're sitting at the table and we're part of this and we're experiencing our own lives.
It's the recognition of the passing of time, right? Both within the hour and 40 minutes that you're sitting with them at the table, and also the idea of these 5 people have lived lives, and they have so many stories and bits of their lives to tell. So by the time that the play comes to a close, it's not just the feeling of having been with them. It's that feeling, the overwhelming feeling that comes with that life moves and time passes, and that is the heroism of life.
And that is drama.
Yeah.
Drama of, I mean, Beckett, Godot, I can't go on, we go on.
Right.
That's,
Well, Beckett is all about how time is passing
right.
within the play.
And how do we spend that time? What do we do with our lives? I mean, it becomes a meditation on how do you spend your life. The talk about the Japanese garden at the end of the Michaels, and of Kate's Japanese garden, and how that gets you to look inward, sort of becomes a metaphor, without hitting it on the head, for what these journeys are. If you walk through this with us, you will look into yourself. And I think that's true. And again, to go back to that scene at the table where I was still learning how to do this with Richard. And every night I would come off and I go, is that it? And he'd go, well, yeah. Or sometimes he'd just be shaking his head. And I go, okay, I don't get it. And I went from leaning forward and not trying, he would say, don't try to convince anybody of your point. Even though what I'm saying is we all have thoughts and feelings and I want to hear what you have to say and I want you to hear me. I would lean forward. I would be impassioned about it. And gradually I'd get back and talk from here. And gradually I'd move back to here. And finally, when I took my hands off and just sat back like this, he goes, that's it.
Don't do anything.
Don't do anything. But for me to trust that that was enough to be on stage doing that was my journey. And now I go right to it at the first rehearsal because we've been this this direction. My wife, who's also in all of these plays, Marianne Plunkett, is
wonderful.
She's expert at going there without much direction. She just naturally sits there, so I keep watching her.
Her direction
going,
seems
good.
to usually be like the things around the kitchen. She's an excellent doer.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
She is a heroic liver of life.
Yeah.
But that's I do think that there's been a process for me as an actor learning what Richard's been talking about. Now, yeah, I would challenge. You should talk about the not Conjuring, but Jungle Coup. The idea, what he was looking at way back at the beginning of all this. I did a one-man play of his in which I interviewed myself looking for my own story and never came up with one other than the stories I'd covered. But he wrote a play of a man in a jungle with a radio who created an event, a coup that wasn't happening because nothing was going on. So he created one, and then, of course, in almost Twilight Zone fashion, then the radio breaks. Now, where are you? What is it? What is actually happening? What is it? Anyway, but without going on into more detail than that, the ideas that he's been pursuing since the beginning of his writing, as I understand it, is how many different directions can I look at events from Killing of Yablonsky? How can I deconstruct what we accept as the event in our own lives? And ultimately, how can I simply let it alone and let the event be life itself and the existence of us together in a room?
Is that where this particular aesthetic for the Rhinebeck panorama really allows you to do that because the actors get to have a great say in terms of who their characters are and what is said? Or is that an incorrect assumption on my part?
I think that's an incorrect assumption. Yeah, I think we come into rehearsal with a script that's in very good shape. And then we make changes along the way, because I ask the actors to really put the play's feet to the fire. And if there's any moment that they hit where they are going to try to make something work or hide a fault, I said, let me know. Let's find out. Let's fix it. Let's work on it. And let's figure this out. So it's
that's what I meant. I didn't mean improvisation or anything along.
But so now what I do,
it's not character.
But what I do, one of the things I learned, because I've been writing plays for 50 years, and for the first 25 years I didn't direct my plays, and so I sat next to some really great directors and some not so great directors. And one of the things I learned watching is that there's a mistake, one mistake that directors should not make. And that is what you should do is that you should listen to your actors. Now, I would say, unless you have a particular actor who is self-involved and only interested in themselves, which is very, very rare, I think, in the theater, except for those cases, almost always when an actor has a problem, they're right. There's a problem. Mm-hmm. Almost always, their solution is wrong. So what you need to do is open up the problem and figure out how to solve it. If you have 7 people on the stage, like I do here in the Michaels, I have 7 individuals, actors, who are looking at the scene from their own perspective. That's 7 perspectives at the same time. I'd be a fool as both director and playwright not to want to listen to that, not to want to engage that, open that, and use those perspectives. So that's what I'm looking when we get into rehearsal to sort of tell me where things flag, tell me where you are lost, tell me when you're sitting there listening to something that's going on for 3 pages and you haven't spoken, tell me, are you okay with that? Does that make sense? Or are you just feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing because I'm not saying anything here? So let's go through, let's work this through, because at the end of the day, what these plays have to feel like, and this is where where the most difficulty, is they have to feel effortless. If anything's struggling at some time, if you sort of distrust and feel someone, or the writer or the director or the actor is just sort of making something work and covering something up, then the entire play collapses.
You can have one moment like that.
No, you can't, and that's what's very, very hard to achieve. And so that's how we work, and so I use the actors very, very well.
What you're saying about very true. It is because you have 7 points of view, every point of view matters, but no one point of view is the play. So what's very important to each one of us is not his answer. It's he goes, oh, I see that's missing. Then he, as writer and director, has to look at the whole thing and see where the solution to that is. And sometimes it's in changing what that character is, but sometimes it's in redirecting. Sometimes it's as simple as, well, if you said that to her, oh, that would change it. Nothing has changed except, as Richard was saying, the redirection of the energy in the room. And sometimes it's just for a moment. Sometimes it's just a simple turn to the right instead of to the left. And much as that sounds like nothing, in these plays, it's everything.
Did you find that when you started working in this aesthetic and you started thinking about the Rhinebeck plays, or even before, if you were starting to think about this aesthetic, did you think about the work of, I know that Chekhov is a big influence on you, and I want to ask about you sort of doing the Rhinebeck plays as a Chekhov play in a way, which you did at Hunter College last year, or was it earlier this year, excuse me? Last year. But did you look at the work of like Mike Leigh or anybody like that? Because Mike Leigh for me was my first introduction, or Cassavetes was my first introduction into a kind of hypernaturalism. Although I would say that Cassavetes doesn't necessarily fall into that place. He's in some way emotionally surreal. But Mike Leigh, specifically the early work, very, very much about sort of small minutia movements, the passing of time.
Yeah, Mike Leigh, I've been a fan of Mike Leigh's for a long, long time. Cassavetes, I agree, is a totally different story. Where I slightly veer differently is that I don't call these plays naturalistic, and I don't call them realistic or ultra-realistic or ultra-natural. I use the word verisimilitude is my ambition, that I'm after truth. That's why I don't have walls in these plays. There's no sets. A naturalistic set you would think has walls, has naturalistic lighting, or you have lighting that's coming from the window or lighting from a lamp or things like that. I don't have any of that. I start these plays with a bunch of furniture piled up in a space, and the actors come in, they move it around, bring in the props, and we start the play. And that's a recognition, first of where we are, the truth of where we are, where we sit in front of an audience. Then I'm asking the actors, one by one, to be just truthful. To, again, go back to what I said earlier about don't show the audience, just simply talk as truthfully as you can to the person you're talking to, and that person listen as truthfully as they can. And then create a world of verisimilitude is the ambition. And so that's where Mike Leigh, I think, has a lot of that as well in his work, but there's a lot of naturalism or the supernaturalism, which is like what Jay was talking about earlier, where there's a lot of hoes and hums and pauses and things, and where naturalism becomes a style. And what I'm not interested in a style presentation. I'm interested in the truth of the event.
Do you ever take issue when people call your plays or refer to your plays as fly on the wall? Because people say that about something like Frederick Wiseman's documentaries, and I'm always kind of like, he's not a fly on the wall. This is very editorial. It may be 5 hours long, but he's still picking and choosing, and his plays are not 5 hours long generally, but he's still very, very much picking and choosing the sort of narrative points that he wants to reflect on, as I think you are, as much as it may feel fly on the wall?
Well, I mean, in terms of 5.5 hours, when we toured the Apple Family Plays, it was an 8-hour day. And the Gabriels was a 6-hour day. I mean, fly on the wall. What fly on the wall means, the positive for me means, is that the audience is becoming active. They're making a choice. They're coming to the wall to listen. And I'm asking for a relationship with the audience in these plays that they actually work. The audience comes in and leans forward and is going to work to put together what's going on in front of them. It's not being shown. And lots of audiences find that incredibly exciting and rich and rare. Some audiences don't, because they're used to being shown things. They want to sit back and have it very clear what's going on.
They want the cats to dance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So a fly in the wall, looking through the keyhole, overhearing a conversation at the next table in a restaurant, all of those images I think are appropriate and good, and I'm very happy to have that feeling in the room.
Talk about doing Uncle Vanya last year, because that is, while in many ways you can see the sort of direct line of influence from Chekhov to you, Chekhov also still is building to that sort of more classical climax that his plays have. He's not deconstructing it as much as you are, but you were still trying to bring that style of the Rhinebeck panorama, I felt like, to Vanya. What was it like working with that text while trying to operate in that sort of hyper-truthful, non-showy style?
Well, I wasn't trying to do it. I was doing it. I mean, in other words, I didn't try to put something on it that didn't fit.
Oh, okay.
And Richard can tell you because he was at the roots of it, not only directing but in actually co-translating it with the Pavirs. He was getting at something that I then, as in all of these cases, we stand on the shoulders of the work that he's started and find our way forward. We bring them to life, but the impulse for it, and Richard would tell you, is often to take out the style of the time in which it was done, which included a kind of a melodrama. And I know many Chekhovian productions that are full of long suffering, long pauses, and showing that life goes on, and we'll but it's not. Yeah, go ahead.
But the difference here is, I don't think I brought the Rhinebeck panorama aesthetic to Chekhov so much as I think I was revealing what Chekhov really wrote. For whatever reason, Chekhov productions have grown to be about individual characters. And so you have a so-and-so character is this way, and so-and-so characters are this way, and people do scene studies based upon in the acting classes about these characters, whereas I believe passionately that what Chekhov wrote is what I'm trying to do, which is a series of relationships. And so it's conversations that he was interested in, and not big, large acting moments of character. So that's what I was after. And the interesting thing, what interested me as a director-writer, especially as a writer, the challenge of Vanya is that there are 3 soliloquies. And so I wondered, how could we do a soliloquy where I maintain the notion of people really talking to somebody else. If someone talks to a whole room of people, like in a soliloquy, like normally you see on the stage, then that's talking at people. You're not talking with or to someone. Or if you're ignoring the audience and talking to yourself, then that's odd. You're talking to yourself out loud. That's an odd theatrical device. So we worked very hard and developed a set basically where I could put Jay at a chair at a certain point in which he could just turn his body just like this, and there would be an audience member right there, no more than 2 feet away from him, and he could have a conversation with that one person.
Why do you think we have culturally reinterpreted Chekhov to be about individual characters or about those big moments? And does it have anything to do with the way that we interpret what theater should be as well right now?
Totally. I mean, it's an evolution of. I mean, this you can say it's star-driven at certain places because that's what people want to come and see. Olivier or whomever plays so and so. And the idea of
It's even like the Eugene O'Neill play that was just on Broadway with Denzel Washington, right? Like you watch that play is a cast of characters, and Denzel is almost a small part of that. Forgive me for not remembering the name of that
Iceman
classic.
Cometh.
Iceman Cometh, yeah, the classic Iceman Cometh. But as much as it's called the Iceman Cometh, it's not necessarily just about him. Yet it's star driven, and it becomes the big performance of the whole thing.
Exactly, and there's a classic play, the classic example of a play all about relationships, all about people in the same situation where they're revealing each other to each other and needing to talk and listen to each other. That's how I believe that play was written, and again, I think that's at the heart of Chekhov.
What do you say to, and I guess this is kind of a devil's advocate question, but someone who would say, well, the heart of the relationships on the stage is conflict, right? Like you're saying it's about relationships, and someone would say, well, those relationships are also about desire and conflict and want. How do you separate those things?
Oh, I think it's easy. Strindberg, August Strindberg, in the preface to Miss Julie, wrote that the multiplicity of motivation is indicative of his time. I think it's just simply true. That what he means is that we do the same thing, often for even different reasons, and even contradictory reasons, that we as human beings are so complex and so complicated that everything's entwined. The moment you start to pull away you pull away, say, the politics of someone to make a point, that's not who we are. We can't pull the politics without also our sexual lives, our family lives, our ambitions, on and on and on. Everything is entwined. And so drama, if that's what it means, is requiring you to actually make human beings less complex than they actually are. And so what I'm trying to do is put complicated, confused, ambiguous human beings on the stage. As I say, as Jay knows, I say before every first day of rehearsal, that's all we are trying to do in this play, and we will always fail.
Yeah, but as much what you're leaving out is that as complex as anyone in the audience. In other words, it's not just those in the light. It is the human condition that we are.
Say to the audience, "You're not complex enough to get us. You fail."
Right, and that because we're trying to be as we're trying to faithfully be as complicated as you watching us, observing us, and we know that's impossible because to fully understand that is kind of ultimately beyond anyone. We're always aspiring to getting there. But it also relieves you as an actor, it relieves you of this pressure to do it right, to be brilliant, to do this. And that's always the ego of the actor to say, I was phenomenal tonight. I really hit the notes of that. I went to this emotion. I thundered through or whatever it is.
I lost 75 pounds for this role. It was incredible.
Well, that's different because that's desirable sometimes. We call it the Shakespeare diet up at the Delacorte, where you just sweat off all those extra pounds of the year. But the feeling that our job is actually easy because we know we're not going to get there, so we can back off and simply aspire. Simply put ourselves into this situation and aspire. And that's what I think is something that I've gotten in spades from Richard in our relationship. And again, I did this early play with him years ago, 43 years ago, and then we came back together with all of this.
7 years into your playwriting career, you did it. That's wild.
And that he's been very instructive in terms of, because Richard doesn't act himself. He doesn't actively participate in that, as there are writers and directors who also act. But he understands something that many, many people I've worked with don't. And so much of it's about relieving ourselves of the pressure of thinking that we're supposed to be omniscient and know more than anybody. And if you have the right intention and play that intention full through, I go, then you're not being human, because nobody does that in a scene.
Nobody really knows what they want.
Right.
That's
It's a rarity that anybody.
right.
That
It
comes-
is.
yeah.
It is. When they say play your intention, they're going simplify it and make the colors bright. And what that's really saying is be louder, be faster, be stronger, be more heroic, be less human.
And no one knows what they want. That's Chekhov.
That's exactly
Right.
right. That's exact, and all of that coming full circle to what you said about Uncle Vanya. It made it very easy to play, because every step, every day that we worked, I was confused in a good way, and I accepted that my confusion was now Vanya's confusion, as everyone else on that stage was confused in their confusion, and we brought that all together, and that was the play. And people said, "Oh, I've never seen that done like that before," because they recognized the complexity, I think, the simplicity and the complexity. And Richard also took a 5-location play and put it all in the kitchen, which simply relieved it, brought it all back to just the relationships. None of it was about the scenery, the sounds of outside versus inside, the special light of time of day, all of which is pretty. And, it's like great cinematography offering something, which it does offer, pictures and all, but those things take away from the center, which is simply how are you talking to each other, or having trouble talking to each other.
Forgive me, this might be another sort of like how do you do it question. But the Rhinebeck panorama has often been referred to as a series of political plays because they take place within a time of change or on an evening of massive political change in America. And one of the things that I love about the Michaels is that its politics are more about what it has been like the last 2 years to live in the age of Trump as an artist, which is like so heavy-handed and so uninteresting at times. And your character is just so bored with a lot of the art that has come out within the Trump era. But that said, what I loved about that is that it is just a moment in the play, and it is not something that you feel the need to tie up. So often, as storytellers are taught that they have to, if it's brought up, it must come back around and be tied up in some satisfactory fashion. How do you know what has to have that and what doesn't have to have that within your stories? Because there is some of that, the dance is there, but the political aspect, it's not like we come to some sort of conclusion at the end. It's just a general feeling in one moment of what it's like to live like this.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the plays, I learned something when I started to direct the plays, and that was a very surprising thing to learn. I thought that I would never direct. I had no real interest in directing my plays, and I just sort of fell into it a few times by accident. And then I learned that when I write my plays, I do not see them, and I do not hear them. That rather I feel them. It's a dynamic that I feel, and you could almost say, so it's like a musical score in a way. And so what you're talking about is elements of the musical score. What can come up, what stays, sort of what's a minor key, what's a major key. All of those things sort of is how one feels. So it's really a gut feeling. So when I and Jay knows as well, when I start to direct the plays, and it's initially with people who I haven't worked with, it's hard. I have to convince them because I have these two big hats. I'm the director and the playwright. I have to convince them that I don't really know how to do it, but we're going to work together to figure out how to direct these plays. But what I do know is when it's wrong, because my gut tells me when it's wrong. So I say, we can try anything. If you want to have an idea to try some staging here, let's try it. But if I say, no, it's wrong, then let's try something else.
It's very unusual that this is the way in which Richard offers his vulnerability of saying, I don't know. I know what I'm doing. I know there's a great play in here that I'm after, whether I've completely finished it or not. I'll discover as we go along. But I can't tell you how to do it. But I'll recognize it. I'll recognize if it's wrong, and therefore recognize when things are right or righter. But in offering his vulnerability in that way, he also invites our vulnerability, and in inviting our vulnerability, we allow the characters to live more fully. Because when someone says, "Oh, they were so uptight, they didn't laugh, they weren't really there, they just sort of watched," what you're really saying is they're not vulnerable with me. They don't feel safe enough to be themselves. So Richard puts us at home around a table with relationships, often lifelong relationships, generally with an outsider or two, so that there's somebody in the room who's seeing us similarly to the audience, who still has to learn a lot about and can ask simple questions without it sounding like it's coming from an author, but is a very real question from a person who hasn't been there. And in that vulnerability is where the whole play happens. And I have to say, when I did Vanya, I believe that all that made that fly was vulnerability. It was my allowing, and we didn't go in to hit high notes. We discovered those high notes of coming apart of Vanya as we went along. We didn't go in and say, "Oh, now here's the part where," it was really just following the situation along to what Chekhov had written into these people. And it allowed me such depth in my vulnerability and raw places that I went to that were surprising to me and surprising to the audience, but they were all very real because they had been found step by step, simply honoring what Richard's talking about of not getting in the way and allowing yourself to be vulnerable with the people you know and love.
That gut instinct of what is real and what is not real, did you have to find a place of confidence where you could trust that? Because you're not necessarily articulating what you want to your actors or your lighting designer. You just know what feels real when you see it. So if you can't articulate it initially, when did you reach a place where you're like, it's okay that I can't articulate it, I know we'll find it?
Well, I think it's the trust of my collaborators, and when I realized, one reason I thought that I couldn't be a director or didn't want to be a director was that so many of the directors that had done my work that I'd watched were like generals.
Exactly.
And I thought, I can't be a general. My personality is not a general.
Hyper articulate, move this, go there, do that.
Very
right.
confident.
Decisive.
Yes.
Even if they didn't know what it should be, they said they're going to expect me to make a decision and have a point of view.
I refuse to not know.
Right, but the joy, what I learned, is that actors and designers, to have the opportunity to actually collaborate in that way, to have their thoughts considered, discussed, tried, opened up a kind of rehearsal room and a collaborative experience that was really rich for everyone involved and very, very special. And so I started to feel that there was something else in directing a play than just being a general, that there was another way to go about it, and different kind of rehearsal.
Guys, I don't know if it's obvious, but I love your work so much, and I'm so happy that you were able to come here and talk to me about it and basically give me a little lesson in how it's done. The Michaels is currently at the Public Theater. It's running for into December, right?
December 1st.
December 1st, and it's so beautiful. And if you've never seen a Richard Nelson play, go do it. There's really nothing else like it. And give a huge round of applause for Richard Nelson and J.O. Sanders for being here.